Greenwich Mean Time. Here are the Caribbean news headlines with me, Oren Gordon. Economic analysts say the attack on U.S. targets yesterday could accelerate the expected economic downturn. When it does, tourism could be hit. Caribbean prime ministers continue to send messages of support to the United States President George W. Bush.
We share the pain of the United States of America, our hemispheric partner, our close ally, and adopted home of thousands of insurgents. Our sympathy goes out to the families of the victims. Our prayers are with the victims' families.
The Guyana government says it will set up a task force to try to resolve a disagreement with the United States over deportees. There's more Caribbean news in 5 minutes' time. Here's the world news.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. As dawn breaks over the United States, rescuers are continuing the search for survivors at the scene of yesterday's attacks in New York and Washington. There's still a sense of disbelief over the magnitude of the disaster, seen as an appalling stab into the heart of America. This report is from Claire Doole in Washington.
Rescue teams are digging for bodies after a series of airborne attacks devastated the symbols of U.S. financial and military power. The World Trade Center in New York was worst hit. Several hundred firefighters died when the building collapsed around them as they worked. Dozens of police officers are also missing. The mayor of New York has warned the number of casualties will be horrific. At the Pentagon, rescue work can only begin in earnest at daybreak. Fire officials are quoted as saying up to 800 people were killed when part of the nation's military headquarters was destroyed. The final number of dead may not be known for weeks. In his address to the nation, President Bush spoke of thousands who had lost their lives in what he called despicable and evil acts. He sought to reassure the public that the perpetrators would be punished.
No group has said it carried out the attacks, but as the FBI begins its investigation, officials say they have evidence that supporters of the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden were involved. Mr. bin Laden has issued a statement denying involvement, but fully supporting the action. The FBI has set up an internet website where people can report any information about the crimes. A U.S. senator says the FBI is examining taped conversations, allegedly between the hijackers and suspected supporters of Mr. bin Laden. The investigators also have details of mobile phone calls made by passengers of the hijacked aircraft before they crashed. The world is still absorbing the shock of the attacks. Foreign ministers of the European Union are holding an emergency meeting, and statements of support have poured in from America's allies and a handful of usually bitter rivals. Most Arab leaders have condemned the events. Only Iraq gave its backing to the action. There were some celebrations in Palestinian camps in the West Bank, Gaza and Lebanon. The unprecedented assault on America has caused fear and uncertainty in the world's financial markets. Nervous investors have put their money in traditional safe havens such as gold. Mark Ashurst of our business unit reports.
With the US markets out of action, stock markets across Europe made a hesitant start this morning. Shares in London, Frankfurt and Paris retraced some of yesterday's falls as the worst-hit sectors, notably insurance companies and airlines, partially recovered. Investors sought refuge instead in drug makers and utility companies. Overall, though, share prices remain well down on the levels before yesterday's attack. Oil prices have begun to stabilize at just under $29 a barrel after OPEC, the oil producers' cartel, said it would guarantee supplies. And gold, generally out of favor but traditionally seen as a safe haven at times of volatility, shed some of yesterday's gains.
You're listening to the news from the BBC. American forces in the Gulf are on maximum alert following Tuesday's attacks. U.S. defense officials say the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, which was due to return home, has been told to remain in the region. Our Middle East correspondent Frank Gardner reports.
The U.S. military in the Gulf has good reason to be nervous. After the successful terrorist attack on the Pentagon, it's clear that nowhere in the world is safe, and the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet makes an obvious target for attack. Much to the annoyance of anti-Western Islamists, it has a major force deployed in the Gulf and Indian Ocean, including an aircraft carrier and cruise missile destroyers. There are an estimated 20,000 US servicemen and women in the region, as well as squadrons of planes based at sea and on land in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. The US Navy was the launch pad for the cruise missiles that struck Afghanistan and Sudan following the terrorist attacks on US embassies in East Africa 3 years ago.
The United Nations says it's immediately evacuating all its staff in Afghanistan. A spokesman said staff would be withdrawn temporarily as a precautionary measure. Last night, the Afghan capital, Kabul, was rocked by a series of explosions. Missiles were seen crossing the sky, and a fire broke out after what appeared to be a strike on an ammunition dump. Air travel around the world has been thrown into chaos as the United States closed its airports and borders and grounded its planes. US-based airlines are not expected to resume flights till later today at the earliest. Flights already on the way to the United States from Europe and Asia have either returned home or have been diverted to Canada, stranding thousands of passengers. Some carriers have suspended flights to Canada. BBC News.
From London, BBC Caribbean Report.
Analysts predict a faster downturn as a result of the attacks on US targets. I'm Maureen Gordon, and this is BBC Caribbean Report Morning Edition. The attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon have caused mayhem with air traffic in the United States. And for a while yesterday, the crisis meant that it wasn't possible to phone most Caribbean countries from outside the region. Mark Savage reports that it's all bad news for regional tourism.
Air travel was thrown into chaos as the United States closed its airports and borders and grounded commercial planes. This is the first time that all the country's airports have been closed to civilian traffic, although military aircraft are still flying. Airlines are not expected to resume flights into and out of America until later today at the earliest. The grounding had an immediate effect on the Caribbean, which has strong air links with the US. Even if flights resume today, economic analysts say the incident could have a dampening effect on air travel and consequently tourism. Analysts expect that security will become much more strict and check-in times considerably longer. That too will hit the tourism industry. Countries like the Bahamas get the majority of their visitors from the US, and they were already wary about the predicted economic slowdown in the country. They'll not like the analysts' prediction that the attack could accelerate the downturn. One sign that they could be right is that markets fell sharply on the news.
Mark Savage reporting. Flights already on the way to the United States had to turn back or be diverted to Canada. The authorities in Bermuda reporting that more than a dozen aircraft destined for the US were diverted to their international airport. They're reporting that the airports and hotels coped well with the unexpected influx. More Caribbean leaders have been sending messages of support to President Bush. Grenada, Antigua and Barbuda, Belize and Guyana joined with the others who sent messages earlier. The St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves said he was deeply shocked and horrified by what he described as a dastardly act.
We share the pain of the United States of America, our hemispheric partner, our close ally, and adopted home of thousands of insurgents. Our sympathy goes out to the families of the victims. Our prayers are with the victims' families.
Officials in both the US and Europe have been cautious about blaming any group. Britain's Foreign Secretary Jack Straw said this morning it's much too early to tell. But while the US looks around for suspects, should the Caribbean countries whose leaders went to Libya 2 weeks ago be nervous about that trip? Dr. Gonsalves was one of those who went to Tripoli. He's dismissing a suggestion that they should think again about close relations with Libya.
Any act of terrorism of this kind is to be condemned. That has nothing to do with the opening of relations with any other country. The British government has an embassy, a People's Bureau of the Libyan government in London. I mean, what does this have to do with Libya, the opening of relations? I mean, that's a non sequitur. That's an absurdity.
Ralph Gonsalves, in other news, the Ghana government says it'll set up a task force to try to resolve a disagreement with the US over deportees. The American government is threatening to stop issuing visas to Guyanese within a month unless Georgetown agrees to take back more than 200 of the deportees. The Montserrat government is hoping that Antiguan plans to dredge its main harbor could have some economic spin-offs for them, but they remain concerned about the effect on the environment. Montserratians have had to virtually rebuild their country in the north after a volcano wiped out the more developed and populated south. They're looking to cruise ship arrivals, and once nearby Antigua gets a deeper harbor, it could mean bigger ships and more passengers for both islands. Montserrat's Chief Minister John Osborne has told Antigua's Minister Malvin Joseph of his concerns. Keith Stone-Grace reports.
There had been increase in public concern, especially among the island's fishing community, after the government in Antigua announced plans to dump waste material from its harbor just off Redonda, some 16 miles from the Montserrat coastline. However, Minister Joseph says based on recent scientific studies, the debris would, in his words, pose no danger to the environment and marine life in Montserrat. Antiguan officials have also promised to talk to their counterparts in the neighboring islands of St. Kitts and Nevis, who also fear being affected by the waste dumped in the sea. Keith Stone-Graves in Montserrat for BBC Caribbean Report, Morning Edition.
Keith Stone-Graves ends the Caribbean news. This is Oren Gordon saying goodbye from London. You're listening to the BBC World Service in London. At this time, we're meant to have BBC Sports Caribbean, but unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we're unable to bring you that program. Our next scheduled program is BBC Caribbean Magazine at 1:15. That's in about 3 minutes' time. Again, we apologize for our inability to bring you BBC Sports Caribbean due to technical difficulties emanating from BBC Television Centre, from which the program is broadcast. BBC Caribbean Magazine is next at 1:15. This is the BBC World Service. We've managed to re-establish contact with our sports desk, and we can now bring you a truncated version of BBC Sports Caribbean. Colin Maitland.
Well, not surprisingly, Tuesday's events in the United States have had a huge impact on sport on both sides of the Atlantic. Major League Baseball scrapped its entire schedule, and football and golfing fixtures have also been affected. It's also been revealed that a leading figure from the world of NHL ice hockey was aboard one of the planes which flew into New York's Trade Center. Here's Nishat Adat.
The ripples of shock from the devastation have found their way into the sporting arena. In the United States itself, Major League Baseball cancelled all of Tuesday's games. It's the first time since 1945 that the entire schedule's been scrapped. The last time a disaster halted Major League Baseball play at all was in 1989, when an earthquake interrupted the World Series. Major League Baseball's commissioner, Bud Selig, said it was in the interest of security and out of a sense of deep mourning for the national tragedy that has occurred. It is a severe problem for the sport, considering there are less than 3 weeks remaining of the season, with teams vying for playoff places. Barry Bonds is hoping to hit 8 more home runs to break Mark McGwire's record of 70. Minor League Baseball's championship playoff games in 9 leagues have also been called off. Major League Soccer postponed 4 matches scheduled for Wednesday, and the PGA Tour has cancelled Thursday's start of the World Golf Championship in St. Louis. The event, which will feature Tiger Woods amongst others, will now begin on Friday with 36 holes. 2 other tournaments in Tampa Bay and Oregon will now also start on Friday, but all the schedules are subject to change.
Meanwhile, FIFA, football's ruling body, is reviewing whether international matches worldwide should go ahead as planned. On Thursday, Oman are due to play the United Arab Emirates in a World Cup qualifier, and Iran play Bahrain. There are further Asian group qualifiers involving China, Uzbekistan, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia in the following days. The World Under-17 Championships start in Trinidad and Tobago on Thursday, and the USA are still involved in World Cup qualifiers from the CONCACAF Federation. And that's BBC Sport Caribbean.
Hello and welcome to BBC Caribbean Magazine. In today's programme, America is reeling after terrorist attacks that destroyed one of the national landmarks.
I think it's going to take longer than the first time it got bombed. I think people are going to start thinking. I don't know if they're going to start thinking the right way. But it's really kind of hard to say how people are going to weather this one.
And also in the programme, little interest is shown in the Jamaican inquiry into this summer's violence.
The fact is, many Jamaicans are wary of a commission of inquiry. They are accustomed to commissions making recommendations and nothing coming out of these recommendations.
I'm Carol Orr and welcome to the programme. America is reeling after terrorist attacks that have destroyed one of its national landmarks and badly damaged another. Wednesday's New York Daily News headline simply reads, "It's war." Leslie Goff reports from New York.
America under attack. Our coverage continues from WABC Radio News. This is WABC.
They call New York the city that never sleeps, and it might never, now that one of its landmarks has been leveled by terrorists, sleep well again. For Pat Robertson, a Jamaican-American who worked in the Trade Center for many years until recently and believes friends of hers may be buried in the building, it has been an unbelievable shock.
I felt numbed. It was awful. It was an awful feeling because I know this once happened before. I didn't know the magnitude of what happened. But to tell you the truth, I instantly embraced and thought some of my friends who were in there. That's all I could think about. I'm hoping that they weren't there. I worked there, about 10 years. I've never even been upstairs to the observation deck. So no, I don't perceive it as this sort of target that anybody somewhere else wants to make a point and blow up.
As investigators pick through rubble for clues to who may have been behind the attacks, Muslims like Jimmy Salam, a schoolteacher, admit to being nervous that people of his faith will be unfairly targeted.
This is going to be a setback for the progress that Islam has had in the United States.
Does this put African-American Muslims, does this put you in a difficult situation, always having to defend Middle Eastern Muslims?
It may do that because people may just bunch all Muslims together. If they do that, yes, it will put us in a difficulty. But I have a feeling some people are going to at least try to judge African-American Muslims for their own merit and not box us in with a group of people from a foreign country.
So will New York City ever be the same? Will it brush this off? As it often boasts, it brushes everything else off. Pat Robertson doubts it.
How tough can you be when this happens? I wonder if they're going to even build it back up. I think it's going to take longer than the first time it got bombed. I think people are going to start thinking. I don't know if they're going to start thinking the right way. But it's really kind of hard to say how people are going to weather this one.
Pat Robertson, a Jamaican-American, ending that report by Leslie Goff. New York-based Guyanese journalist Ian Willibus spoke to a few Caribbean immigrants who had a look at the tragic incident and its aftermath.
I felt sick to my stomach. As I watched it, I was shocked, to be quite honest. I work on 31st Street and 7th Avenue, and from time to time I would stand on my building, the Southgate Tower, and look at the Manhattan Towers, and actually see when I saw when the second plane hit. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. And when the first building collapsed, I think I was shocked. I was shocked beyond anything. I never believed that, they could fall like that and stuff like that. Then the second one went. I mean, the place looked empty. It's just the strangest thing I've experienced. The strangest thing.
Do you feel fortunate that you were not actually in Manhattan?
Absolutely. Extremely happy that I wasn't there. Actually, what I did, I called my friends that work at a hotel, quite a few Guyanese and Caribbean people and stuff like that, to alert them to go on the roof and look in the vicinity of the World Trade Center and actually see what's happening. When I did that, I realized how chaotic the whole place was. We worked at a hotel. The lobby was filled with people, and, those guys had to be rushed upstairs in an effort to maintain some amount of security and stuff like that. The place was so chaotic. Transportation went down, everything went down. The good thing about it is most of them can just stay at the hotel there, but for others, I've got other friends who also called me in an effort to get to stay at the hotel.
Well, I guess I would have to say my first reaction is fear. Fear. Being in a big city, I guess that something like this is possible. The U.S. is definitely involved in all world events, and this is, terrorism at its utmost.
You have described to me that you have been on the phone with a friend of yours who also is Guyanese, who actually witnessed the first collision, the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Center. Could you tell me what exactly he related to you?
Well, he was there. There is a train service that originates below the World Trade Center to go to New Jersey. He was about to go down into the subway system when the first plane hit. Of course, he didn't know it was a plane. He just, the debris and the noise, and he ran backwards across the street. He stood there for about 15 minutes, and the second aircraft hit. That's when, they were instructed to leave the area.
How was he as he related it to you? Was he shaken? What were his emotions like?
Well, he was really, 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 sort of out of it. He has only recently come to this country, started schooling, so, a whole bunch of second thoughts and everything else about, such a big city was started to impact on him. He was scared, shaky.
Caribbean nationals reacting to the tragic incident and its aftermath in New York, and we'll have more on the American disaster later in the program. You're listening to BBC Caribbean Magazine. Moving closer to the region, in Jamaica, the Commission of Inquiry enters its third day. But it appears as witnesses are brought before the three-man panel, public interest has yet to be ignited into the hearings, scheduled to last at least 6 months. The inquiry, led by Canadian jurists, is set to look into the events surrounding the violence in West Kingston during the first weekend of July, when more than 24 people died during clashes between residents and security forces. The island's Commissioner of Police told the hearing yesterday that the violence had its genesis in an incident in April when 3 people were shot and killed, including the popular leader of the so-called Black Roses gang. Our correspondent Conrad Hamilton told Bertram Niles that so far little interest is being shown in the inquiry.
The fact is, many Jamaicans are wary of a commission of inquiry. They are accustomed to commissions making recommendations and nothing coming out of these recommendations. And while many persons respect the commissioners and value the importance of a commission of inquiry, they are wary of what will result from the hearings, which might last until late next year based on information you're receiving.
So this could go into 2002, you're saying?
It could. In fact, the commissioner did indicate that it might go on to April of next year.
But the fact that the government went to Canada for a judge to chair the commission, hasn't that helped in perhaps giving a semblance of respectability, if I may use that term, to the commission?
It has. But then the fact is, normally the commission would have to make recommendations to the government, who then has to act based on recommendations. And that's why persons are wary. They're wondering, will the recommendations of the commission be effective? And if the commission finds out anything, what will happen as a result? And that's the concern of persons. What will come out of all this money which is being invested in a commission of inquiry? Oh, I should mention that yesterday at the hearing, the commissioner, it's a public hearing, but I don't know what happened yesterday, but the chairman of the commission instructed persons with video cameras that they were not allowed to film the proceedings, while radio and newspaper personnel are allowed, and with their recorders, video personnel are not allowed to tape the proceedings.
Did he give a reason for that?
He didn't, but that is in fact drawing some concern, particularly from persons representing the citizens and the Jamaica Labour Party, who indicating that it is a public hearing, and if persons are not allowed to attend the hearing, they should at least be afforded the opportunity to view it on television.
Conrad Hamilton speaking with Bertram Niles. And returning to the lead story worldwide, the cataclysmic events on America's East Coast have been compared to Pearl Harbor. But for most Americans, they were far more shocking. This, after all, was an attack on the mainland of the United States, and there wasn't even the bitter comfort of knowing who the enemy was. The BBC's correspondent Rob Watson has been following the night's events from Washington as the story unfolded.
The end of the day that shook America. After crisscrossing the country for security reasons, President Bush finally touched down at the White House to deliver reassurance to a troubled nation.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation.
There was also a promise to track down those behind the attacks.
America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
Even as the president was speaking, the emergency services continued searching through the carnage at the Pentagon just a short distance away. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had been in the building when disaster struck.
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured, most of which were alive and moving, but seriously injured.
Standing beside him, the Chief of America's Armed Forces, General Henry Shelton, was clearly furious at this first ever attack on the symbol of U.S. military might.
I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
The attacks had brought the government to a dramatic halt, congressmen fleeing Capitol Hill for fear of further assaults.
God bless America.
But they returned a few hours later with a spontaneous rendition of God Bless America on the steps of the Capitol. From the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, a message of unity.
One thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together.
Too little too late for some, perhaps. Security has now been tightened here in Washington. I'm at one of the many blockades on the roads surrounding the White House, the building only visible through a sea of Secret Service agents. There have been promises, too, from Transport Secretary Norm Mineta to boost safety measures nationwide.
Travelers will indeed see increased security measures at our airports, train stations, and other key sites.
That report on America from the BBC's Rob Watson. That is the BBC Caribbean magazine. Don't forget to join us at 21:15 GMT for our evening edition of BBC Caribbean Report. I'm Carol Orr.
This is the BBC World Service bringing you extended coverage of the tragedy which is still unfolding in the United States. Rescue teams have been working through the night to find more survivors from beneath the rubble of the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, both of which were hit by hijacked planes. In a few moments we'll have more reports from around the world, but first a summary of all the latest developments from Sue Montgomery.
President Bush has said the United States will hunt down and bring to justice those who organized the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Thousands are believed to have been killed when hijacked airliners were flown at the public landmarks. FBI officials say they have evidence that supporters of the Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden were involved, but he has denied being behind the attack. The search continues for survivors in the rubble, with rescue workers describing the scene in New York as one of utter devastation. Hundreds of survivors are being treated in hospital, and there are reports that some people trapped under the debris have made contact using mobile phones. European foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss how security can be tightened. Statements of support for the US have poured in from America's allies, and even from those who are usually bitter rivals, such as Cuba and Libya. Only Iraq has backed the action. The attacks have caused fear and uncertainty in the world's financial markets, with share prices plunging for a second day, as nervous investors abandon shares to put their money in traditional safe havens, such as gold and oil. Air travel around the world has been thrown into chaos as the United States closed its airports and borders and grounded its commercial planes. Hundreds of passengers remain stranded. There have also been security alerts in many other parts of the world. Israel has shut its land crossings to Egypt and Jordan until further notice and closed its airspace to foreign planes following the attacks. In Malaysia, the world's tallest building, the Petronas Towers, home to many American companies, was evacuated after a bomb threat. The United Nations says it's immediately evacuating all its staff in Afghanistan as a precautionary measure. The UN fears the United States might launch attacks because of the presence in Afghanistan of the Saudi militant Osama bin Laden. BBC News.